Hi, I'm Roberta Faux, and I'm going to talk to you today about beyond PKI, rethinking trust in the quantum era. So here we have a system that couldn't be updated. And that's not a hypothetical. That's the reality of critical infrastructure that's not designed to last for 30 years, running on cryptographic assumptions made decades earlier. Imagine it's 2031. This is a protective relay in a power substation. It was installed in 2009, and it's still doing exactly what it was designed to do. It authenticates using the cryptography that it was built with, and it's running its original firmware from 2009. And if you want to update it, you don't just push a patch. You need to schedule an outage, and that outage requires coordination, regulatory approvals, and this can take months. The vendor stops supporting updates for this generation. A replacement part takes over a year, and the relay still has another decade of operational life. This is normal infrastructure, and we've already seen how systems like these get exploited, and it might not be in the way you imagine. Recall the Ukrainian power attacks in 2015 and 2016. Sandworm didn't need to compromise the relays themselves. They gained access to the trusted system. They stole the operator credentials. They issued legitimate commands through the SCADA interfaces. And the system accepted those as valid. And the relays did exactly what they were supposed to do and stop the power flow. So the trust model didn't fail here. It just trusted the wrong entity. Now look at this device again through that lens. It's a trust anchor. The system around it, the grid, the SCADA layer, the operators, all of that relies on this device to decide what is legitimate. And this isn't just about one device. This is an entire class across every sector of critical infrastructure. This is where we have long life cycles, limited upgrade paths, and fixed cryptographic assumptions. All of these devices will outlive RSA 2048 by years. We're talking about power grid relays, rail signaling systems that can operate for 30 to 40 years of continuous deployment. And any of these changes requires regulatory approval, and that can often take years. Think about our avionics systems, our satellites. There's no patch cycle for hardware in orbit. These systems outlive the assumptions they're built on. Now layer in post-quantum cryptography. It's not inefficient, it's not slow, it just doesn't work. These systems were never designed to span cryptographic iterations. And here's what that means practically. An adversary doesn't need to break in today. They capture the encrypted traffic and they store it. That's harvest now, decrypt later, and it's happening right now. Then an adversary waits, because when that cryptographically relevant quantum computer arrives, and that might be in the early 2030s, RSA 2048 doesn't degrade. It breaks. The math that made those captured exchanges unreadable, it stops working. And then suddenly, authentication becomes impersonation. Not because anybody broke in, not because the device malfunctioned, because the assumptions from many years earlier are no longer valid. The device has no way to know that and no way to change. So again, the system didn't fail, the assumptions did. And the question isn't whether this is coming, it's whether we can adapt before it arrives. And I'd argue the real problem is not a cryptographic one. We have the algorithms, we've published the standards, we've spent a decade proving the cryptography, and we've spent almost none of that time on the thing that's actually failing us now, deployability, particularly where crypto is hardest to change. Think about what MLChem asked of a constrained device. Larger key sizes means a larger memory footprint and a different computational profile. On a modern server, that's invisible. But on a 2009 protective relay, it's not a configuration problem. It's an impossibility. So on the one side, we have the cryptographic standards ready for the post-quantum future. And on the other, we have a base of critical infrastructure anchored in the past, with regulatory cycles, long replacement programs, and sometimes capital budgets that don't exist. The risk doesn't live in the algorithms, it lives in that gap. We lack the deployability. And until we treat this like a first-class problem, not an implementation detail or an engineering concern, the gap widens every year. And the pressures on trust are building. This is no longer just a post-quantum migration problem. Trust itself is under pressure from multiple directions. We're all familiar with how quantum computers will challenge the fundamentals of our public key cryptography. AI has also made identity cheap to generate, with massive scale and low costs, and increasingly indistinguishable from what is real. And the operations, the systems we've already talked about, these devices are outliving the cryptography. The infrastructure cannot adapt. And that's not really a gap. That's more like a structural failure. And I believe it's already in motion. LLMs change the game. They don't break the cryptography. They break something below that layer. It's the humans. The assumptions around identity. Cryptography proves identity, and AI makes that identity unreliable. The question is no longer who you are, but it becomes who you are right now in this context for this action. Think about 2023, we had the MGM resort attacks. The attackers didn't find a 0 day. They didn't break encryption. They called the help desk and impersonated an employee using publicly available information. They were issued valid credentials. The authentication system worked perfectly, but it authenticated the wrong person. Total exposure for that attack was over $100 million, and no cryptography was harmed. Now imagine that same attack, automated, personalized, and scaled by AI. The attack surface is shifting. Attackers don't need to break into systems anymore. They far prefer to just become trusted users. We saw this in both the Ukrainian and MGM examples. Find the trust, use the trust. The security controls don't need to be engaged because the attacker never triggers them. In 2024, Microsoft tracked 600 million identity attacks in a single day. Over 99% of those were authentication, credential replay, password spray, phishing, not exploitation, not intrusion, authentication. And if authentication is the attack surface, then the integrity of the trust model has to be the defense. So if we rethink that trust architecture, here's what I think it looks like. Trust has to move into a layer that can adapt so that the devices beneath it don't need to. At the top, we need an orchestration layer where keys can be generated, policies can be enforced, and trust decisions can be made continuously. And that's the layer that can run the modern cryptography. Trust is then pushed down through the system as short-lived keys, ephemeral credentials with narrow scope and short expiry. And that then continuously distributes to the devices below. At the bottom, the fixed systems, the relays, the PLCs, the avionic controllers, those receive the keys. They don't store them long-term. They don't make the trust decisions. Those devices don't change, and they don't need to, because the control no longer lives inside them. It lives someplace in a layer above that can evolve as fast as the threats do. So you don't need to modernize the device, you modernize the trust around it. And if trust must be continuous and rotation must actually work in constrained environments, then the cryptography underneath has to support it. And that's symmetric cryptography. The keys are small, they're fast to generate, they're fast to rotate. And in these constrained environments, the security can shift from relying on the mathematical complexity to relying on the strength and the speed and the ephemerability and the scope limitation. That's not weaker, it's different. And I think in these environments, it's much more practical. So in closing, let's go back to that relay. It's still in the field. It's still doing its job. It's still authenticating RSA 2048. And it's still running that 2009 firmware. It hasn't failed, and it's not going away. The question isn't whether we'll eventually upgrade that cryptography. We will. The question is whether the trust model around it, around that device, can adapt while we wait for the upgrade cycle to catch up. Remember, quantum is the forcing function for this transition. AI impersonation will likely be another, and there will be more. The transitions will continue to come faster than the hardware cycles, and we need to build trust models that are designed to change, not ones that assume we won't need to. This is how we can survive cryptographic transitions.